All right, so picking up from where we left off in the last video, we just have a few ideas to kind of wrap up chapter 2 here. And these are all ways to apply those guidelines and dietary recommendations to what you're going to see in the grocery store and your choices. So starting with grains, you can likely run into a few different types of grains. We're probably familiar with at least whole wheat bread versus white bread, right? But there are actually many different types of grains based on what has happened to them if they've been processed. This applies to like other grains like rice too. So we have our refined grains, and these are foods that have lost a lot of their nutrients through the process of food processing, right? Typically it's to make a version of that food that is more desirable or can be used in a different way. So our white rices and our white breads are refined foods. There was another goal with them, either to make them taste better or like white bread to be fluffier and sweeter. There are some enriched grains, which have been refined and then added some of their nutrients back. So better than refined as far as the variety of nutrients they're providing. And typically these are micronutrients like vitamins and minerals. Whole grain breads are unrefined, so typically unprocessed or a low amount of processing in order to take that food from its natural source to what you're getting in the grocery store. So like brown rice and whole wheat bread, oatmeal, these are all whole grain products that still contain a majority of the nutrients that were in the natural plants that produced it. And then lastly, we have fortified foods. So whereas enriched foods have the nutrients that were removed added back, fortified foods have extra nutrients that weren't there to begin with to try to increase the overall healthiness of that food. So your whole grain products are likely the healthiest version. It's going to give you the greatest variety of nutrients. Enriched or fortified foods could be next on that list, depending on how much of these nutrients and what variety are in them. And then your refined foods are going to be the least healthy option in this case, simply from lack of variety. And so we can see a comparison of all of those here. So in orange, we have our whole grain breads. In purple, we have our enriched white breads. So the whole grain bread was processed and lost a lot of its nutrients, and then some of those nutrients were added back. And then we have unenriched white bread in blue. And so you can just take a second to evaluate here the main differences that show up for a variety of these micronutrients here. Right? Whole grain bread is going to have more of almost everything. The enriched white bread does have more of these different vitamin Bs, thiamine, riboflavin, folate, niacin. These are all vitamin Bs. So for thiamine, riboflavin, and folate, they actually added back more than was there originally. So compared to whole grain bread, you're actually getting more. Depending on what your dietary recommendations are for that, this could either be a good way of getting these vitamins or might be giving you too much. Either way. So just a quick practice question kind of to summarize this part on grain. So a food product that is high in fiber with all of its nutrients retained in the food product can be described as a, take a second to pause here and think about what you would answer. Okay, hopefully you chose a whole grain food. Okay. Nothing said in the question about anything being removed. It is just high in fiber. It has retained all of its nutrients. There's nothing added. That is a whole grain food. If nutrients that were originally there are being added, that's enriched. If nutrients that were not originally there are being added, that's fortified. And then if nutrients have simply been removed, that would be refined. Okay. So now let's talk vegetables. So as often as you can, choosing fresh vegetables is going to be the healthier option than a packaged, processed, or frozen version of vegetables. Right? They're going to maintain a greater variety and greater amounts of their natural nutrients, and vegetables and fruits are going to be your greatest source of your micronutrients, your vitamins and minerals. So a lot of these diet plans recommend choosing dark leafy greens, which are also going to give you a good amount of protein as a source here. In yellow-orange vegetables, really you can think of it as just trying to get a variety of colors, and you can apply this to both fruits and vegetables. I just realized the image that I've included here has oranges hidden in here, which are fruit. But anyways, if you're getting a variety of colors on your plate, you're likely to be getting a variety of micronutrients. Okay. Another thing to consider with your vegetables is using beans, legumes. So anything that we typically consider a bean or a nut, that is likely to be a legume. Also peas are an example of a legume. It's like a modified fruit. We don't need to get too much into that. But legumes are a great source of that would give you a variety of nutritional value from that. They're very nutrient dense. Right? They're also typically quite cheap because we can produce them in high quantities and quite quickly, and typically almost all year round. Okay. Fruits. So again, there are suggestions that are going to point you towards citrus and yellow-orange fruits. Again, if you just apply trying to get a variety of colors, you're likely to be getting a variety of your micronutrients. Processed fruits have been listed as acceptable alternatives, but again, anytime a natural food source is being processed, it's going to be losing something. Okay. And so we touched on this a bit earlier, but fruit juices, right? What about those? Fruit juices are taking juice from the actual fruit that it's saying. However, these are typically also going to come with a pretty high amount of added sugar. And that added sugar typically is something you do want to try to limit, though fruit juices are still going to provide usually a good amount of your micronutrients, a good variety of nutrients. But you're also losing some of the fiber that would have come from those sources as they're being broken down, right? You're just getting the juice, you're not getting all of the structural carbohydrates that would have made up the shape and structure of the fruit. And then lastly, fruit drinks. Again, this is different than a fruit juice. A fruit drink is flavored to taste like a fruit, but doesn't necessarily include juice from that actual fruit in it. So these are typically energy dense because they have a lot of added sugar, but nutrient poor. They're not going to give you the same variety of micronutrients that an actual fruit juice or the whole fruit itself would have given you. So, things to consider. And now our meat, fish, and poultry, right? You don't need meat, fish, or poultry, right? There's vegetarian and vegan diets that can still give you a variety of protein sources with using things like legumes, a variety of fat sources from the same kind of thing, legumes or oils, right? But meats are going to be high in that protein content and typically also high in fat content. Right? So trying to focus on lean cuts is a typical suggestion. Again, not as much research nowadays supporting that saturated fat and cholesterol need to be avoided. But historically, that was something you tried to limit. We also get some minerals and vitamins from meat that aren't as commonly present in vegetables and fruits. Right? And we're going to talk about other ways that like a vegan or vegetarian diet can cause some limitations. So even though you're getting typically healthier sources of our macronutrients, you may be missing out on some of the micronutrients that we would only be getting from meat if you're not taking a supplement. And it's also limiting in the number of, the amino acids, but I'm trying to remember the term. I don't know why it's slipping my mind in this moment. But when we talk about proteins, we'll get into how amino acid distribution, there are no complete proteins that come from a plant source. And thus you're not getting all of the amino acids that we have to get from our diet that we can't produce ourselves if you're only eating one source of vegetables. So trying to make sure you're getting a variety that have those different amino acids in them is going to be like just an extra complication, I guess, as far as keeping up with your nutrition, whereas a lot of meats give you all of those amino acids that our bodies don't produce. Anyways, when purchasing meat, focusing on lean cuts is generally suggested, so less fat or removing fat before cooking or using low-fat cooking methods, etc. Okay. So now looking at some restricted diet plans that have been shown to be healthy, and both of these were developed with a specific goal related to disease. So the 5-a-day colorway stemmed from trying to develop a nutritional plan that could assist with reducing the risk of cancer, and the DASH diet plan, which is focused on reducing the risk of hypertension or high blood pressure. So the 5-a-day, the colorway program was designed by the National Cancer Institute. It's based on research that had linked high fruit and vegetable consumption with cancer prevention. Again, pointing out here, just like most of our nutritional research, this was a correlative study. It was not highly controlled in order for us to make a strong supported conclusion, but it may be the best piece of information we have as far as trying to make a suggestion that does relate to cancer, right? So, or reducing cancer. This meal plan recommends a minimum of 5 fruits and vegetables per day, and it groups the benefits that you would get from that fruit or vegetable based on the color. So it's saying like eat a red, eat an orange, eat a yellow piece of fruit or vegetable. That red fruit or vegetable is likely to give you this and this benefit, blah, blah, blah. And they just kind of group them by their colors, which is generally true. The DASH diet plan is focused on trying to reduce hypertension. It's literally the name, dietary approaches to stop hypertension or high blood pressure. So it has similar dietary recommendations to the MyPlates, but increases the amounts of fruits and vegetables it recommends per day. And specifically, what's going to affect the hypertension the most here is limiting that sodium intake. Okay? So having too much sodium is strongly related to heart attacks and hypertension. So limiting your sodium has been shown to reduce blood pressure, and eating a lot more of those natural sources of your nutrients from fruits and vegetables can help with that too. Okay, so we talked about the required information that you see on our food packaging, including the nutrition facts panel. Something you also commonly see on our food products nowadays are claims. So there are different types of claims to look out for. Nutrient claims are typically just straightforward and factual, right? Fat-free, so that food does not include a significant amount of fat. It has less than 1 gram of fat in it. So it can be labeled as fat-free, right? That is generally factual. You can generally trust that. Things that are saying like 50% less sodium, this is where you need to start being a bit more critical of like, what are they comparing that to? So in the case of something like this collagen chicken broth, it's likely saying there's 50% less sodium in this package compared to their regular chicken broth that doesn't have that claim on it, right? But some foods are also, or some products are trying to make claims compared to their direct competition. So 50% less sodium than this other brand's chicken broth. So when you're seeing that, just kind of look into it. Still check with the nutrition facts panel label. Just because this has 50% less sodium doesn't mean it has a low amount of sodium in it. It just has less than whatever they're comparing it to. Okay, so those are nutrient claims, generally relatively straightforward. Health claims get a bit more complicated. These are regulated by the FDA. And so in order to have a health claim on that label, it must be validated by the FDA, and the FDA also grades it with different levels of confidence. Okay? So this is typically something that is characterizing their food with how it relates to some type of disease or health-related condition. Right? So for example here, the health claim on this package of oatmeal says soluble fiber from oatmeal daily in a diet, low in saturated fat and cholesterol, may reduce the risk of heart disease. So these types of claims are typically going to include language like may, maybe, could, right? Things that are open to interpretation, right? They could, sure, you could say that it could do anything, really. So those you should be extra critical of, or at least more critical than the nutrient claims. And then the claims that you should trust the least out of all of them are structure function claims. These are not regulated. They do not require validation. And so companies can really put whatever structure function claim they want on their food package. So these are describing the effect that a substance has on the structure or function of the body. They don't make reference to particular diseases, right? That is what separates them essentially from these health claims, is they're not talking about a specific disease, but they will typically use language related to health, right? So supports immunity and digestive health. Right? This yogurt brand can do that and get away with it, even if it has nothing to do, or they have zero research that they could pull out and show you that it actually supports immunity and digestive health. In this case, typically a probiotic would have to include some, or if they use the term probiotic, that does mean that they have some bacteria in that food that has been shown to be beneficial for your microbiome. But then this other claim of supporting immunity and digestive health, they could just throw on there and say whatever they want. Right? So here's the different grading that the FDA can provide for health claims. So again, these are claims that a company is making related to a particular disease. So they could be graded from a high level of confidence down to very low, but even with a very low level of confidence, that label might still make it onto the packaging. Typically, they will require some sort of revision to the claim. And so we can see that here. So the rejected claim, this is what was the first iteration that this food company tried to use, is that tomatoes may reduce your risk of ovarian cancer. Okay? So likely whatever food product this is from had tomatoes in it, and they wanted to include this, that tomatoes may reduce your risk of ovarian cancer. The reason for rejection is that one study suggests that consumption of tomato sauce 2 times per week may reduce the risk of ovarian cancer, while this same study shows that consumption of tomatoes or tomato juice had no effect on ovarian cancer. The FDA concludes that it is highly uncertain that tomato sauce reduces the risk of ovarian cancer. So first off, the study that they were using to back their claim is their results showed that tomato sauce had some relation to reducing ovarian cancer. So not whole tomatoes and not tomato juice. This company tried to put just tomatoes. Secondly, after the FDA reviewed that research, they found it unlikely that the results from that study are actually even strong enough to support the idea that tomato sauce can reduce the risk of ovarian cancer, and thus this claim was denied. And so the revised claim that did end up making it onto the package is that lycopene-containing tomato-based foods may reduce your risk of cervical cancer. So into a completely different cancer that has been linked to a very specific protein in tomato-based foods. And this is the claim that they are allowed to use. Really, this is just saying that this protein has been shown to reduce, that it can or may reduce your risk of cervical cancer. You see how particular these things can get, right? But anyways, so again, structure function claims are things that really you shouldn't be paying any attention to at all. Right? If they're just making a general claim about health and not relating it to a specific disease, that was not validated by the FDA, and they can kind of just do whatever. So things like build strong bones, defends your health, promotes relaxation, slows aging. You hear these a lot in commercials too, right? Those are unsupported. Okay? Maybe not always. Maybe there is some research that has led that company to truly see a link between them or believe that they see a link, but these can essentially just be made up without any evidence to support them. Okay, so those are all how we can apply, or suggestions for applying dietary guidelines to your grocery choices. I have a couple slides here talking about how you might use them for eating out. Eating out is super common in America, right? A lot of convenience, right? So things to be aware of or look out for when eating out and trying to maintain a healthful diet. The foods that we get at restaurants are designed and curated to be delicious. Okay? That restaurant owner wants you to come back and spend more money than you would have on the groceries to make it. Right? You're paying for the labor, of course, and that's fair and all. But typically, in order to make a food trigger our taste buds and our brain to go, oh yeah, I like that, that's going to include high amounts of fat, high amounts of sodium, and high amounts of sugar. These are all high value. Historically, part of our evolution, these would have been high value foods in nature to find naturally growing somewhere, and thus psychologically, we still have the instinct to strongly prefer these foods and strongly desire them. And so often, the most delicious foods are also going to be high in some of these things that we typically see suggestions saying that we should limit. Another thing is that restaurants are typically going to provide large portion sizes. It's very, very common that you get a to-go container for your meal and leave with extra food, right? You paid for one meal, but you're going to get 2 or 3 out of it. Okay? So being aware of that, you're likely getting a large energy dense meal when you're eating out. However, there are things that you can try to include or try to make substitutions for to at least increase the nutrient density of what you're getting and maybe limit the energy density of what you're getting, thus generally getting a more healthful meal. Some restaurant meals can be provide as high as 2,000 kilocalories in one meal, right? So some general suggestions, if you are trying to strictly follow some of these nutrition guidelines: avoiding breaded or fried foods, which are almost always processed, very often going from frozen to cooked, essentially losing a lot of their nutrients that would have come from that original piece of food, whether it's meat or plant-based food. Substituting soups or fries, which are really high in sodium and really high in fats, with something like a salad. You can order dressing on the side, so you can limit how much dressing you want to include, because those dressings are also often going for that high value, right? High in sugar, high in sodium, high in fat, to make them taste better. Asking for steamed vegetables. So the way you cook your food is also going to play a big role in how many nutrients are retained in it. Steamed vegetables or steaming vegetables is one of the best ways to have your vegetables retain a majority of their nutrients. Substituting vegetables for potatoes or rice. So although potatoes and rice are plants or plant sources of food, right? Potatoes are literally a storage unit for carbohydrates for the potato plants. Right? It is the roots where they store all their starch. So very high in carbohydrates, which can be negative on your overall like glucose levels in your body. This can play a role in things like developing diabetes, right? Developing insulin resistance. And so these are typically energy dense, but not nutrient dense. So substituting other types of vegetables instead of eating potatoes or rice. Avoiding your creamy sauces or cheese sauces. These are going to be really high in saturated fats and cholesterols, could even include trans fats. Again, research is showing that our understanding of saturated fats and cholesterol is lacking, but too much of any one thing is likely not going to be healthy for you overall. You want that variety. And these cream sauces and cheese sauces are just extremely high in fat. And then, to try to limit the amount of calories you're getting in that one sitting, trying to order smaller portions or even appetizers. Lots of restaurants nowadays have appetizers that absolutely could substitute for a full meal, right? So just some general suggestions as far as applying what is typically provided as a dietary guideline, but still being able to go eat out and maintain a healthy diet. Anyways, so that's all for chapter 2. As always, please reach out with any questions or concerns, and I'll see you guys in the next one.